Good morning, good evening, good night. We're watching this transmission. It is I, Mike Martins. The entire house is snoring asleep. I'm still awake and still putting around here in the house, getting things done and getting the house ready. And yeah, got visitors coming up to visit me and kind of excited for that. So, anyways, guys, ANZ Bank. It's in some serious hot water. You guys have no idea. And we're not talking stocks and where they're sitting at stock wise. I couldn't care less. The banks are required now to have a certain amount of reserves. Period. They need reserves. They need to have some sort of backing in reserves, and banks don't fail to do that. With this fractional reserve lending and all this other crap that banks have been doing all these years, and not holding anything. So let's get to the article here and articles. There's actually quite a bit here on ANZ, and the ANZ's not looking really good. ANZ shares tumble as New Zealand's central bank calls out precedent failure. Yes, a precedent failure. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand has condemned ANZ's New Zealand Bank for failures and revoked its ability to assess its own capital requirements, forcing it to hold an extra 277 million in capital in New Zealand dollars. So they need to hold more capital, right? And if they don't have the liquidity, and if they don't have the liquidity, it's a problem. Like, I'm pretty sure some of these banks, and I'm being honest with you guys, will have a really hard time scrounging up $5,000 or $10,000, like legit $5,000. Sometimes they have a tough time without having to create debt. You know what I'm saying? I'm talking about like actual have money. You know what I'm saying? Like Australia's bank regulator APRA and New Zealand Central Bank allows the country's big four banks, which are owned by Australia's largest banks, to use their own models to assess their operational risk capital requirements, right? So basically they decide how much like interest-only loans are we going to put on the books. Okay, maybe we could do 40%, and then 30% need to be lines of home equity loans, and then the other 40% could be secured mortgages, right? Or unsecured loans, and we could do visas, and we could do MasterCards, and we're allowed to do student loans. So, they're up to them who they approve for these things, and it's up to them who gets the who underwrites the deal and approves it too, right? So it's kind of in their hands, right? However, RBNZ today revealed ANZ New Zealand license to do so, citing a precedent failure in its controls. A certification is earned through maintaining high risk management standards and comes with stringent responsibilities for the bank directors and management, says RBNZ Deputy Governor. The RBNZ reviews and approves the internal models used by the banks, but Mr. B said the onus is then on the bank and directors to ensure their banks is compliant, right? So a lot of banks have skipped the whole compliance thing and went ahead and went after the commission. And that the internal assurance processes are being adhered to. ANZ's directors have assessed to the compliance despite the approved model not being used since 2014, he says. The fact is that this issue was not identified for so long, highlights the president weakness in ANZ's assurance processes. The central bank now requires ANZ in New Zealand to use its new standard approach, which has increased the minimum capital it needs to hold around 60% to 760 million New Zealand dollars. In a statement, ANZ New Zealand said it discovered it was not using an approved model during a review in April. So there's district and regional managers that know that they're not doing this and they're not doing things by the book, right? So a lot of people were hell bent believing that property prices are just going to go up. So who cares what happens, right? We'll just keep going up. We'll just keep lending people money to live off their equity, right? And for the longest time. And you'll see in a couple of articles how it basically is tied in to the housing slump right now in New Zealand. Once the mistake was discovered. A mistake? Okay, a mistake is when I lose a set of car keys. A mistake is when I forget to feed my cat. A mistake is when I get a times table wrong, or I do some wrong math. That's a mistake, okay? But going against a policy and really? Once the mistake was discovered, ANZ New Zealand promptly escalated the matter to its board and reported the issue to the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the bank said. While isolated and with no impact on customers or operation of the bank, ANZ New Zealand is disappointed this error occurred. So the RBNZ censor comes at the central bank considered a proposal to increase the minimum capital requirements for New Zealand banks, including ANZ, Westpac, NAB's, Bank of New Zealand, and Commonwealth Bank, ASB Bank. Analysts warned that it could have a material impact on the Australian banks. Australia's bank regulator raised the minimum amount of capital required to safeguard against home lending losses in 20. You need more than $600 million. I can tell you that straight up. But there has been ongoing discussion for possible further increases. Yeah, guys, you know what? You want to get serious with this? Put a couple of $1 billion in reserve to hedge against this housing crash in New Zealand. Aussie bank returns and dividends could be hit by NZ requirements, say analysts. So an analyst is weighing in on this and saying, New Zealand Central Bank has proposed an increase to the amount of capital banks must hold. An analyst has warned it would have a material impact on the Australian banks. The big four banks all have operations across the Tasman with ANZ, Westpac, NAB's, Bank of New Zealand, and Commonwealth's Bank, ASB Bank, dominating the market. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand wants the banks to have more skin in the game to protect against the kind of banking collapse that is a 1 in 200-year event. There's going to be this banking collapse is with interest-only mortgages, 0 down if you qualify. Just sign right here. Here's your house. 0 down mortgages. Oh my God, 100% loan to value. Oh God, you throw that crap on the books. Oh, you're gonna have bank examiners there looking over everything in the next 2-3 years and find out what the heck are these people doing with people's lives. The Reserve Bank of New Zealand wants to have more skin. I read that already. We have proposed banks to come on the table with more of their own chips and less of other people's, which will reduce the risk of them folding and reduce the risk of New Zealand taxpayer even having to step in to save them. Yep. The middle class, working poor, the people that did not involve themselves in this crap have to pay for it. Plain and simple. Our RMBC Deputy Governor said in his speech in February, as a part of rationale for increasing the capital requirements, the central bank has noted the deep social impact of recessions that are caused by bank crisis, including industries being wiped out and a widespread of job losses. So we're too hinged to, all English-speaking countries in the Commonwealth are severely hinged on banks. That's the problem, right? We're not building we're not wealth building, we're debt building. We're building more and more debt. We're getting more into debt to inflate these asset bubbles even further. I think one reason why New Zealand policymakers have taken this approach is they do see quite a lot of correlated risk there, said JP Morgan senior economist. Yeah. There's risks that the New Zealand economy bears itself, but there's also the idea that New Zealand is quite strongly tethered to Australia, so any shock in Australia that Australia would endure probably would be transmitted to New Zealand. So watch out, people, if you're living down in Kiwi land. And ANZ profit slips and slowing the housing market. So I have here, I was looking at the stocks here, and they're kind of in a dip right now. They didn't do too well. They did okay in the last 5 days. And they kind of plateaued the last day. The last day the market market's open right now. Actually, it's going to close soon. So there it is. There's their dividend yields. Their dividend yield is 5.67%, which is really good. So I mean that's great. But what's going to happen when they can't? So let's go back here. Okay. So we read that one. Okay. ANZ. Profit slip on slowing housing market. ANZ has reported 5% slide in its first half profit, weighed down by rapidly cooling property market. So the banks are just in bed with the housing market, and instead of paying people interest on their sorry guys, I got like a million. Oh my god! Instead of people making interest off their savings and the banks getting rich with people getting rich. And people making 5-6% off their savings account. You have $1 million in your bank account, you get $56,000 a year in interest. That's how it was 10-15 years ago. Now you're lucky if you get 0.25%. Why? Because the banks aren't banking off people's wealth anymore. No one's got 2 nickels to rub together. Nobody has money to deposit in the banks anymore. People's checks go in and go right out. Bank fees, I don't think are enough to carry the bank itself. Bank fees, bank needs liquidity. Bank needs money in its reserves. It can't do this. It can't go off of bank fees. It won't sustain itself just charging people for deposits and withdrawals. It's not going to work. So there's the 5% slide in its first half profit, weighing down the rapidly cooling property markets. The net profit came in at $3.2 billion for the next 6 months to the end of March. Cash earnings to the banks preferred to measure, which strips out one-off gains, losses, rose 2% to $3.5 billion, ahead of analysis expectations. The interim dividends maintained at 80 cents per share. So when you do the math here, the shares at $28, 28.20 Australian dollars. So it's paying 60 some odd cents 80 cents per share. Okay. Wary of housing markets, ANZ's chief executive officer Shane Elliott said the bank's decision to make a more risk-averse stance in home lending negatively affected the results. Home loan demand in Australia has slowed significantly, and it's continued during the half, Mr. Elliott said. While the decision is to step back from certain segments and compounded this impact, being more risk averse is the current environment is prudent. However, we do accept we could have done a better job implementing our new risk settings and are taking steps to improve processes. You know what, guys? Fly me down there. We'll go over everything. Believe it or not, I know what I'm talking. I know this business really well. Mr. Elliott said the bank is keeping a close eye on its mortgage book, and loan delinquencies are on the rise, and households are feeling the pinch from low wage growth. Wage growth is stubbornly low, so we're worried about families doing it a little bit tough at the moment, he said. We saw 500 or 600 families in this half get themselves into difficulties in terms of not being able to keep up with their payments. That's a lot higher we've seen in the past. So the question is this a trend or is it a blip? No, this is a trend. This is a trend. You'll see it on trends in the housing market. Here it is. Cash results, cash profit. There's on the bank itself. And then strong headwinds. Mr. Elliott told investors to plan and streamline operations back to just its core business had created a stronger bank. The work started in 2016 to simplify our businesses and strengthen our balance sheet has helped us weather the strong headwinds in Australia retail banking while still producing a balanced financial outcome for shareholders, he argued. action taken over the last 3 years to improve the compensation of our lending book combined with the relatively binging credit environment. Binging. Okay, I haven't said binging in years. Results into good credit quality, a good credit quality outcome. So everyone's been binging off their homes. So this is a long article, guys. I'm going to leave a link below for this article here so you guys can see what's going on. And I'm going to leave this with you guys to answer in the comments. Do big banks deserve the mortgage cost advantage gifted by regulators? The 4 banks between them hold around 80% of Australian home loans. That's huge. There are many factors that have led to this: extreme market dominance, economies of scale, better credit ratings, and an implicit federal government guarantee, all of which are linked. So, what risk weighs and why do they matter? It matters a lot. Let's see if there's any.
Here's how it works.
Okay, here we go. Yeah, here's how it
The
works,
bank
guys.
regulator requires banks to hold high-quality capital equal to about 10% of their loans.
Right.
But housing loans are considered safer, so banks only need to hold a fraction of that 10% in reserve. The big banks are allowed to determine this fraction themselves, with a floor of 25%. But APRA makes the smaller banks hold at least 35%.
Higher risk.
On a $1 million loan, the big banks might hold $25,000 in capital, a regional bank more than $35,000.
Interesting. So holding capital is important. They haven't been doing that. They've been doing this fractional. We know people that have been coming on this channel know what's going on, and lots to read here, lots to go through, guys. I'm gonna leave you a link for this one because this one's a really good, well written. It was it's 2 weeks old, but I really wanted to throw this out there because there's a lot of good information here, and I really think ANZ is in a bit of hot water right now. And the housing market downward trend it's not a blip, guys. It's gonna keep going, and I'm sorry to say this, but unless people, like it said in the article, unless people get a 60% wage increase overnight, this is not going to fix itself. So banks are going to have to start actually allowing people to build wealth instead of create debt. That's the key to this. The key to this whole thing. Start paying people money on their money so they can invest money into their bank accounts instead of using the risky stock market and the risky housing market. Let the banks open your doors a bit and let people gain 4 or 5% interest off their bank accounts. Let people say, hey man, if I have $1,000, that's like 70, 50, 60 bucks I could gain an interest. Man, if I have 10,000, that's 500 bucks, I gain an interest. If I have 100,000, that's 5,000 bucks a year. I'll be gaining an interest. If I have $1 million, that's 50,000 bucks at 5%. Then people start wanting to build wealth instead of throwing everything into a high risk housing market, or even a risky stock market. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I would like to know ANZ in hot water, yay or nay, and comment below. And if you wanted to support this transmission, please go ahead and share one of my videos. Thanks for watching, guys. Big hug to everybody.